The rain hit hard that night. Not gentle or forgiving, it came like punishment, washing everything that looked too clean. On the curb outside Riverside Tower, a young man in a soaked gray delivery jacket stood waiting for someone to sign a receipt that no one would ever sign. The guards under the lobby canopy didn't look at him. One smoked. The other scrolled through his phone, the light reflecting on his face like a wall. When the young man raised his voice, "Sir, this is for apartment 32B, urgent order." The guard nodded without looking up. "Leave it there," he said. "Residents don't like dripping water on the floor." The boy hesitated. "It's prepaid. They asked me to hand it over personally." The guard's answer was flat. "Then wait outside." He'd already been waiting 30 minutes. The paper bag was getting heavier from the rain oil seeping through the cardboard. Inside, the food that someone in a glass apartment would never finish was slowly turning cold, just like everything else around here. He looked up. Through the tall glass walls, chandeliers hung like frozen raindrops. People laughed. He couldn't hear them, but their smiles were loud enough. His name was Jaden Cole. 17, final year of high school, part-time delivery boy, full-time invisible. He used to clean floors inside this very tower before the service contract changed. The new company replaced him overnight. No notice, no apology. Now he brought food to the same people who never learned his name. The injustice didn't need words. It was in the way the automatic doors opened for everyone except him. It was in how the guard's eyes slid over him, as if the soaked figure on the sidewalk was just another piece of wet pavement. He wiped his face. The rain didn't care. It kept falling same on glass and skin. Somewhere inside the tower, an elevator bell chimed. Through the fogged glass, he saw a boy about his age arguing with an older man, suits, polished shoes, the kind that never step in puddles. The man's hand cut the air sharply. The boy turned away, shoulders stiff, mouth moving fast. Then the doors closed. Jaden turned his eyes away. None of his business. He just needed that signature. The guard finally looked up. "You still here?" Jaden forced a smile. "It's my job, sir." "Yeah, doesn't look like it's paying much." The comment hit harder than the rain, but Jaden didn't answer. He adjusted the strap of his delivery bag and stood straighter. He had one rule: never argue when they're looking down at you. They always win by height alone. A car honked nearby, long, impatient, expensive. A black sedan stopped by the entrance. The same man from earlier, the one from the elevator, stepped out, talking fast into his phone. His voice was sharp, cold, the kind of tone that ends conversations before they begin. Jaden recognized him. Arthur Reed, CEO of a logistics empire. The kind of man whose company owned the uniforms kids like Jaden wore. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt. Arthur passed within 2 meters of him, still on the call. Not a glance. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement that another human was standing there, soaked to the bone. Jaden stepped aside so the CEO's shoes wouldn't touch the puddle splashing from his own. He'd done this so many times it had become instinct. A delivery truck rumbled past, spraying muddy water across the sidewalk. It hit Jaden full on. The guard laughed under his breath. Arthur didn't notice. Jaden said nothing. He just wiped the mud off his jacket company logo, half washed away, and looked up again at the glowing building where laughter echoed behind glass. That moment carried more silence than any insult could. Somewhere above, thunder cracked loud, unfiltered. Jaden flinched. He'd been afraid of storms since he was a kid, but fear didn't pay bills. He took a breath and checked his phone. Screen cracked, signal weak, battery almost gone. One missed call from his little sister, "Bring milk if it's on sale." He smiled faintly. She always asked like they had a choice. Across the street, people rushed to their cars under umbrellas big enough to cover small dreams. None of them looked his way. To them, he was part of the weather, temporary, unpleasant, easily avoided. And yet if someone had looked closer, they would have seen something steady behind his eyes. Not anger, just the stubbornness of someone who refused to disappear completely. Inside the tower, the CEO's voice rose again. A security guard turned down the lobby music so the argument upstairs wouldn't echo too loud. A storm outside, another one inside, both pretending not to know the other existed. Jaden shifted on his feet. The rain had softened now, less angry, more deliberate. He thought of leaving, just walking home, losing the fare, explaining later that the customer never showed. But his grandmother's cough echoed in his head. The doctor's bill was still unpaid. He couldn't afford pride. He knocked on the glass again, not loud, just enough to make his presence undeniable. The guard sighed. "Didn't I tell you?" The elevator doors opened behind him. A boy stumbled out, the same one Jaden had seen earlier. No umbrella, no jacket, just a hoodie and eyes red from argument. "Hey," the guard called. "You can't." But the boy was already outside, shoving past Jaden, stepping into the storm like it was safer than staying inside. Jaden turned to watch. The boy's sneakers splashed through puddles toward the street. "Wait. You'll slip," Jaden said, but the boy didn't hear or didn't care. Headlights flashed, tires screeched, a horn tore through the night. Then everything went white with rain. Later, people would argue about who was standing closest, who should have reacted first, who should have called for help. But in that second, none of them moved, except the delivery boy. He dropped the paper bag and ran. Inside the lobby, the guard shouted. Someone yelled, "Security!" Arthur Reed turned from the front desk, confusion freezing him mid-sentence as he saw two silhouettes in the storm, one dragging the other out of the flooded street. He rushed forward, slipping once on the wet tiles. When he reached the door, his son was in the arms of a stranger, his uniform plastered to his skin, his lips pale from the cold. "What happened?" Arthur's voice cracked. Jaden looked up, water streaming down his face. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, through the sound of rain and sirens, he said quietly, "Nobody else was close enough." The sentence shouldn't have hurt, but it did. Arthur's expression hardened. "Who authorized you to touch my son?" Jaden blinked, disbelief cutting through exhaustion. He was drowning. "You." The CEO stopped himself. The boy in his arms coughed, weak, but breathing. Paramedics rushed in, pushing Jaden aside like he was debris left from the storm. No one thanked him, no one even asked his name. He stood there, mud rising around his shoes, hands shaking, watching the ambulance lights reflect off the glass tower like a cruel joke. Inside, the guard started whispering, "Wasn't that the kid who used to clean floors here?" "Yeah. Guess he finally found a way back in." Jaden didn't correct them. He just picked up the crushed paper bag, cold noodles, spilled soup, and threw it in the trash. The rain hadn't stopped. But somehow it felt quieter now, like even the sky was holding its breath. If you've ever stood somewhere you didn't belong, soaked unseen, waiting for someone to notice you, probably understand that silence. You might even remember how heavy it feels when people look through you, not at you. I'd like to hear what you would have done in Jaden's place. Tell me your thoughts. Maybe your story echoes his more than you think. And if you've ever been the one who saw someone struggling and stepped forward, stay with us here. This channel keeps their stories alive. You'll find yourself in more than one of them. The ambulance doors closed. The siren faded. Jaden was left alone with the sound of rain against glass, steady, endless, honest. He adjusted his jacket, wiped his face, and started walking home. Behind him, lights flickered in the CEO's window, bright, distant, unreachable. He didn't look back. He just kept walking because some people don't get to stop. The street emptied fast after the ambulance left. Only the rain stayed falling quieter now, as if ashamed of the noise it had made. Jaden walked with his head down, the soaked delivery jacket clinging to his shoulders. Every step felt heavier, each puddle colder. The paper bag he'd thrown away was still back there near the trash bin. Steam long gone, the receipt half dissolved. He kept thinking he should have kept it, something to prove that he had in fact done his job. Nobody would believe him anyway. They never did. The walk home took 40 minutes. Streetlights flickered through fog. The air smelled like wet metal and gasoline. No one offered him a ride. They never did that either. By the time he reached the narrow block of apartments where he lived, his fingers were stiff and his throat burned. Inside the hallway, the light buzzed overhead. The kind of buzz that never stops, but no one fixes because no one important lives here. His shoes left dark prints on the floor. He paused at the door, tried to shake off some of the rain, then pushed it open. The apartment was small, one room split by a curtain. A pot simmered weakly on the stove, the smell of instant noodles mixed with something like hope. His grandmother lay on the couch, under a thin blanket, her breathing shallow. On the floor, his little sister Mia slept curled up beside an open textbook, a pencil still in her hand. Jaden closed the door softly. He crouched near the couch and listened. One wheeze, then another. Still breathing. Relief came slow heavy as the day itself. He hung his jacket by the window. Water dripped onto the floorboards, each drop loud enough to remind him he hadn't eaten. He didn't care. He took the last of the boiled noodles from the pot, poured them into a cup, and sat by the window. Outside, the city still glowed. Tower lights, car horns, the faraway hum of places that didn't sleep. Somewhere out there, the man who yelled at him, the CEO, was probably pacing a hospital corridor, waiting for doctors to say the word stable. Jaden thought of the boy he'd carried. Small frame, terrified eyes, sneakers half untied. He hoped he was okay. He didn't expect anyone to call. The floor creaked. His grandmother stirred. "You're back late again." "Yeah," he said quietly. "Got stuck in the rain." She coughed. "You always do." "I'm fine." He wasn't. His hands were shaking again. He pressed them together under the table, hiding it. She tried to sit up, eat something. "I did." She smiled weakly. She knew he was lying, but didn't say it. "That's good." Mia finished her homework. "She's waiting for you tomorrow morning." "Yeah," he said again. Silence settled in the room like fog. He finished what was left in the cup, washed it, and sat back down. The sound of rain against the glass returned steady, honest, the only thing that didn't pretend. He looked at his phone. The screen flickered before dying completely. No messages. No notifications. Nothing from work. Nothing from the company that would by morning probably dock his pay for the missing order. He stared at the blank screen for a long time. The unfairness didn't scream. It breathed, slow, constant, everywhere. He took a breath and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow will be better." Even he didn't believe it. Down the street, a car passed headlights, slicing through the wet night. Inside, someone laughed at a radio joke. The sound faded before it reached his building. That's how life worked here. Everything good stopped 2 blocks short. He stood and checked the curtain. Mia was awake now, blinking at him sleepily. "You're all wet," she murmured. "Go back to sleep," he said gently. "I'm fine." "You always say that." He smiled faintly. "And I'm always right." She yawned. "Did they give you a tip this time?" He shook his head. "Then they're mean." "Not mean," he said. "Just busy." She frowned, but her eyes were already closing again. "Busy doesn't mean you forget people." Her words stayed with him long after she fell asleep. Hours later, Jaden lay on the floor beside the couch, the sound of breathing and rain filling the room. He wasn't tired, but his body refused to move. The image of the CEO's face kept replaying the confusion, the accusation, the disbelief that someone like Jaden could be the reason his son was still alive. He thought about saying something back, something sharp, something that would make the man see. But he hadn't. He never did. The world didn't listen when people like him talked. It listened when they obeyed. He turned to look at his grandmother again. The blanket had slipped. He pulled it up gently. Her hand caught his wrist, thin fingers gripping tight even in sleep. He stayed there waiting until her breathing steadied. Outside, thunder rolled one last time. It sounded tired. Jaden leaned his head back against the wall. The rain outside slowed to a whisper. He closed his eyes, waiting for sleep that wouldn't come. Somewhere across the city, a hospital monitor beeped. A man in a suit sat beside his son's bed, hands trembling, eyes red from more than rain. He didn't know it yet, but the boy who saved his child was still awake, listening to the same storm fade into silence. The night didn't end when it stopped raining. It just changed shape. The morning came without color. The sky was gray. The streets still wet puddles, thin but stubborn. The air smelled like rust and detergent, the scent of a city trying to wash away what it didn't want to remember. Jaden woke before the others. He sat up quietly, the blanket sliding off his shoulders. His clothes from last night hung by the window, still damp, the logo on his jacket, now only half visible. He looked at it for a long time, not at the name of the company, but at the wrinkles the rain had left behind. He pressed his hand against the glass. The cold bit through his skin. Outside, buses coughed gray smoke into the air. Somewhere a street vendor shouted the morning prices. Life had started again as if nothing had happened. He changed into a clean shirt, brushed his hair with his fingers, and tied the same shoes that hadn't fully dried. The laces snapped. He tied the ends together. That was enough. From behind the curtain, Mia's voice came soft and sleepy. "You're leaving already." "I've got a shift," he said. "It's Saturday. Bills don't take weekends off." She frowned but didn't argue. "Will you bring milk again?" "If it's on sale," he said, trying to sound playful. She nodded and went back to sleep. He looked at her one last time before stepping outside. The door shut quietly. The world didn't notice. By 8, he was back at the small delivery station, a narrow shop squeezed between a pawn store and a mechanic's garage. The air smelled like instant coffee and damp cardboard. Inside, the manager, Mr. Cole, was already behind the counter counting receipts. Jaden walked in, carefully dripping rainwater from his shoes. The man didn't look up. "You're late. I was out on a call until—" "I know. The client called. Said you never delivered." Jaden froze. "That's not true. I was there for almost an hour. The guard told me to wait. Then you left the bag on the ground. That's what they said." "There was an accident," Jaden said quietly. "I had to." The manager finally looked up. His expression didn't change. "You had to? What, abandon the order? I saved someone's life." The words came out sharper than he meant. The man leaned back in his chair. "And did that pay the delivery fee?" Jaden's throat tightened. "No, sir." "Then don't bring it here," the man said. "You know how this works. We don't get paid for good intentions." Jaden nodded once, jaw locked. "I understand." "Good. You'll take fewer shifts this week. Company's cutting hours." There it was no explanation, no apology, just numbers. He signed the new schedule. His name looked smaller on the paper than he remembered. As he turned to leave, one of the other riders, a tall guy with a helmet still on, muttered just loud enough for him to hear, "Should have let the rich kid drown. Might have been cheaper." The others laughed. Jaden didn't respond. He just picked up his bag and walked out. Outside, the sun tried to break through clouds, but didn't. The city had that strange brightness that hides every color. He crossed the street toward the bus stop, shoes squeaking, jacket still damp. Cars sped by, clean, fast, untouchable. He didn't see the black sedan until it stopped in front of him. The back window rolled down. It was Arthur Reed, the same CEO from last night. Same eyes only, this time they looked different, less sure, more searching. Jaden froze. His hands gripped the strap of his bag tightly. Arthur's voice was quieter now. "You're the delivery boy from last night." Jaden nodded once. The man looked him over. Wet clothes, tired eyes, the kind of face the city forgets too easily. "My son. He's awake now. He told me what you did." Jaden said nothing. Arthur stepped out of the car. The soles of his shoes hit the wet pavement. He wasn't used to standing in puddles. "Listen," he began, "I owe you." "You don't," Jaden interrupted softly. "You don't owe me anything." Arthur hesitated. "I said things I shouldn't have." "It's fine," Jaden said. "People say worse. I'd like to make it right." "You can't." The answer wasn't angry. It was just tired. Arthur looked at him closely. "At least let me drive you home." Jaden shook his head. "I have deliveries." Arthur followed his gaze to the torn delivery bag. "You're still working. Someone has to." The man stood silent for a moment. The noise of cars filled the space between them. Then he said quietly, "You remind me of myself. Years ago." Jaden met his eyes for the first time. "Then you should have remembered sooner." He turned and walked toward the bus stop. Arthur didn't stop him. On the bus, Jaden sat by the window. The city slid past wet glass, gray buildings, neon signs blinking half-heartedly. He leaned his head against the window. His reflection looked older than it should. Behind him, 2 passengers whispered about the storm. "Did you see the news that CEO's son almost drowned?" "Yeah, they say some kid saved him. Probably a hoax. Rich people like that need a story every week." He turned his head slightly but didn't speak. No one would believe it was him anyway. Stories like his didn't make headlines. The bus jolted over a pothole. A child laughed. For a second, the sound softened the morning. Then it was gone. At the hospital across town, Arthur Reed stood by his son's bed. The boy's eyes were open now, pale but alert. "You're awake," Arthur said softly. Caleb nodded. "Where's the guy who saved me?" Arthur hesitated. "I found him. He's fine." "Did you thank him?" Arthur looked down. "I tried." "Did you really?" The boy's voice cracked. "You yelled at him, didn't you?" Arthur didn't answer. Caleb turned his head away. "He carried me through the water, Dad. I heard him breathing so hard I thought he'd fall. and when you got there, you looked at him like he'd done something wrong." Arthur's chest tightened. "I was scared." "So was he," the boy whispered, but he didn't stop. Arthur looked out the window. Rain streaks still marked the glass from the night before. The city outside looked smaller than he remembered. Back on the bus, Jaden closed his eyes. The driver turned up the radio. A soft song played through static, something about rain and forgiveness. He didn't listen to the words. He didn't need to. The morning wasn't over, and neither was the storm. The rain didn't come back that day, but the city stayed wet. Pavement shone like glass, every puddle holding a reflection of something that looked fine until you stepped closer. Jaden didn't notice anymore. He was used to things looking better from far away. His shift dragged through the afternoon. Half the orders were late, half were canceled. The manager didn't yell. He didn't need to. That quiet, heavy stare said enough. By evening, Jaden's hands hurt from gripping the handlebar of his bike, the skin at his knuckles raw from the cold. When he reached home, the sky was already dark. The apartment smelled like rice and medicine. His grandmother was awake, sitting at the small table bills spread out in front of her. The radio played a weather report, the voice calm, detached, reading about floods in another district like it was a grocery list. "You're home," she said. "Yeah, you look tired." He shrugged. "Long day. You should rest." He nodded but didn't sit. "How's Mia?" "She's at the neighbors doing homework. They've got better light." Jaden glanced at the unpaid bills. His grandmother followed his eyes. "Don't worry, we'll manage." He smiled faintly. "We always do." But his stomach twisted anyway. He opened the cupboard, took down a tin of instant coffee, and added hot water. The smell filled the room, bitter, comforting, honest. He stood by the window again. Across the street, neon signs blinked. He remembered the tower, the guards, the way the CEO had looked at him like something inconvenient. He wondered if people like that ever thought about the faces they stepped past. He didn't hate the man. Hate took too much energy. He just couldn't forget. In another part of the city, Arthur Reed sat alone in his office. The glass walls looked out over the skyline, every building gleaming under artificial light. His jacket hung on the chair, his phone face down on the desk. He hadn't gone home after leaving the hospital. His assistant had asked if he needed the driver. He said no. He stared at the city without really seeing it. His reflection stared back from the window, calm, composed, successful. The kind of man he'd always wanted to be. But behind that reflection in the city below, he saw the boy again, soaked, shaking, holding his son with both arms. He rubbed his eyes and leaned back. Somewhere in the office, a cleaning staff vacuumed quietly, the sound barely reaching through the glass walls. He thought of how many times he'd walked past people like that. He thought of the sentence the boy had said. Nobody else was close enough. He'd replayed it 100 times. It sounded less like a statement and more like a question. That night he couldn't sleep. He drove to the hospital again. Caleb was asleep, his breathing steady. Arthur sat beside the bed, staring at the monitor lights flickering rhythmically. He whispered almost to himself, "I'm sorry." Caleb stirred slightly. "What for?" Arthur smiled weakly. "Everything." The boy opened his eyes halfway. "Find him." Arthur hesitated. "The delivery boy." Caleb nodded. "You said no one else was close enough. Maybe that's your sign." Arthur looked at his son. The quiet confidence in that voice felt older than 14. He reached out, brushed the boy's hair back, and said softly, "I will." The next morning, Jaden was back at work. He'd learned to keep his head down, to move fast, to apologize before being blamed. It wasn't fear, just survival. He was loading his delivery bag when a voice called from behind him. "Jaden Cole." He turned. It was one of the office clerks from reception holding a folded paper. "Someone's waiting for you outside." Jaden frowned. "Who?" The man shrugged. "Didn't say." "Big car." Didn't look like a customer. Outside, a black sedan idled by the curb. Arthur stood beside it, no driver, no guards, just him. Jaden froze halfway down the steps. "You again?" Arthur nodded. "Can we talk?" "I'm working." "I won't take long." Jaden glanced back at the shop window. His manager was watching. He sighed and walked closer. "What do you want?" Arthur handed him a small envelope. "I came to return what's yours." Jaden hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a folded paper bag receipt, the same one he'd thrown away. The ink was faint, but his signature was still visible. Arthur said quietly, The security cameras saw everything. You waited. You did your job. They should have paid you. Jaden looked at the paper, then at him. You came here for this, no, Arthur said. I came because my son asked me to. Jaden didn't answer. Arthur continued. He wanted to thank you himself, but the doctor said he needs rest. He said you didn't let him fall even once. Jaden looked down at his hands. It wasn't a big deal. It was to him and to me. Jaden stayed quiet. Arthur hesitated, then said, I saw where you live. Jaden's head lifted slowly. You followed me? Arthur shook his head. No, I asked around. I shouldn't have, but I did. I saw your sister at the store. She looks like she's doing well. Jaden's jaw tightened. Don't involve them. I'm not. Arthur exhaled. You shouldn't have to carry everything alone. Jaden's tone sharpened. That's what people like me do. The silence that followed was colder than the morning air. Arthur finally said, Let me help. Jaden's voice was steady, but his eyes were tired. You can't fix the way the world works with a check, sir. Arthur nodded slowly. Maybe not, but I can start by fixing what I broke. He reached into his coat, pulled out a business card, and offered it. Call me when you're ready. Jaden looked at it, but didn't take it. I'm not. Arthur lowered his hand. Then I'll wait. He turned and walked back to the car. The door closed softly. The engine started, then faded down the street. Jaden stood there, the card still untouched on the ground. He picked it up after a long minute, stared at the name printed in gold letters, then folded it once and slipped it into his pocket. Jaden went back inside, ignoring the stares. He finished the deliveries, kept his head down, and didn't mention the car, but every time his hand brushed the folded card in his pocket, he felt something unfamiliar. Not hope exactly, something smaller, quieter, but alive. The kind of feeling that could grow if the world gave it a chance. The city turned colder in the following days. The storm had passed, but the air still carried its memory. At night, Jaden could hear the wind moving between the buildings, the same way people talked about others, always passing through, never staying. He didn't see Arthur again that week. He still had the business card folded twice now, the edges worn from being taken out and put back too many times. Sometimes he told himself he should throw it away. Sometimes he didn't know why he hadn't. By the fifth day, the company called him in. The manager's tone was clipped. Customer complaint. Same one as before. Jaden stood still. About what? They said you were rude. You raised your voice. I didn't. You think I don't get this every day? The man said. You people come in here thinking one act of charity makes you special. Jaden's voice was quiet but firm. I didn't ask for charity. That's good. Because you're not getting any. The man signed a paper, pushed it across the counter. Temporary suspension. You can reapply next month. The words hit harder than he expected. He took the notice, nodded once, and walked out. Nobody stopped him. The door closed with that same heavy sound every place makes when it's done with you. He walked for hours after that. Past the markets, the buses, the smell of frying oil and exhaust fumes. He kept walking until the noise thinned and the buildings grew taller again. When he finally looked up, he was standing in front of Riverside Tower. The glass walls were spotless. His reflection stared back at him, smaller, thinner, still soaked from the drizzle that had started again. The lobby was quiet. He stepped inside. The guards glanced up but didn't speak this time. Maybe they remembered. Maybe they didn't care. He asked for Arthur Reed. The receptionist blinked. Do you have an appointment? No. She looked uncertain. He doesn't usually. Before she finished, a voice called from behind her. It's all right. I'll take it from here. Arthur stood by the hallway, coat off, sleeves rolled up, the look of a man who hadn't slept much. He walked toward Jaden, and for the first time the guards didn't block the way. I wasn't sure you'd come, Arthur said. I wasn't sure either, Jaden replied. Arthur gestured toward the elevator. Let's talk upstairs. Jaden hesitated, then he followed. The office was nothing like he imagined. Floor-to-ceiling glass, 2 chairs, a desk, too neat for real work. A photo of Caleb on the shelf, smiling healthy alive. Arthur motioned for him to sit. You've had a rough week. I've had worse. Arthur nodded. I know you lost your job. News travels fast. It wasn't hard to find out, Arthur said. I spoke to your manager. Jaden's expression hardened. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to understand how someone like you keeps getting punished for doing the right thing. Jaden looked at him evenly. Because that's how it works. Arthur sat forward. It shouldn't. Jaden didn't reply. The silence stretched. Arthur reached for a folder on his desk. I want to offer you something. Not charity. A position. Jaden didn't move. A position doing what? Working with my foundation. We support community deliveries, food medicine essentials for low-income families. You'd be on the ground coordinating with other volunteers. Jaden's voice stayed calm. Why me? Because you know what it feels like to be invisible, Arthur said. And because I can't think of anyone better to make others feel seen. Jaden looked at the folder. The logo on it gleamed faintly under the light. He didn't open it. What's the catch? Arthur smiled faintly. There isn't one, unless you count showing up. Jaden studied him for a moment. You think this fixes what happened? Arthur shook his head. No, I think it's a start. Jaden leaned back in the chair. You could have given this to anyone. I didn't want anyone, Arthur said. I wanted you. The words landed softly but stayed heavy in the air. Jaden finally spoke. You're trying to make up for something. I get that. But you don't owe me. Arthur's tone dropped lower. Maybe not. But I owe my son. He's alive because someone didn't walk past. If I can live another day pretending that doesn't matter, then I haven't learned a thing. Jaden looked out the window. The city lights shimmered against the clouds. What if I say no? Arthur nodded slowly. Then I'll thank you for saving my son, and I'll wish you well. But I'll still hope you'll change your mind. Jaden said nothing. Arthur stood. You can take the folder with you. Jaden reached out and took it. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. He turned to leave, but Arthur stopped him with one quiet line. Jaden, you did more than save a life that night. You reminded me what a life's supposed to mean. Jaden didn't look back. He didn't trust his face to stay steady. He just said, "Good night, Mr. Reed," and walked out. On the elevator down, he opened the folder. Inside were forms, a contact sheet, a letter of introduction signed with Arthur's name. At the bottom, a handwritten note. For when you're ready to stop surviving and start living. The elevator doors opened before he could react. He stepped into the lobby and folded the paper, carefully sliding it into his bag. Outside, the drizzle had turned into real rain again. He pulled his hood up and started walking toward the bus stop. He didn't notice the black sedan parked across the streetlights dimmed, waiting to make sure he got home safe. Jaden reached the bus shelter, sat on the cold metal bench, and stared at the rain. He pulled the folded business card from his pocket, laid it beside the new folder. Both had the same name printed on them. He looked at them for a long time before putting them away. Then he whispered almost to himself, "Let's see what kind of world this really is." The bus arrived, brakes hissing. He stood, stepped on, and didn't look back. Weeks passed before Jaden used the number on that card. He called one afternoon when the bills stacked too high to ignore. His grandmother had coughed through the night again, and the noise of her breathing had sounded too close to something final. He didn't expect anyone to answer quickly, but Arthur did. His voice over the phone was quiet, almost careful. "I was hoping you would." Jaden's response was simple. "I'll take the job." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that feels heavier than words. "Then come by tomorrow. No paperwork. Just start." The foundation's office was nothing like the tower. It was smaller walls lined with bulletin boards and maps dotted with pins. No marble floors, just desks, files, coffee mugs, and people who looked like they'd actually been outside. Arthur met him at the door. "You'll be working with our field coordinator. Deliveries outreach scheduling. You'll figure it out as you go." Jaden nodded. "I can do that." He could. The work wasn't hard. What was strange was how people spoke to him directly, respectfully, like he belonged there. At first it made him nervous. He waited for the tone to shift, for someone to tell him he was just a temporary name on a list. No one did. By the third week, he was leading small delivery runs. By the fourth, he'd stopped checking his phone for missed calls from the old job. Sometimes when Arthur came down from meetings, he'd stop by the loading area. "How's it going?" "Busy," Jaden would answer. "Good. Busy means you're doing something right." They never talked about the night of the storm again, but it stayed there quiet, unspoken, a shared understanding that didn't need revisiting. One Friday evening, after the last van left, Arthur walked him outside. The sky was heavy with clouds again. "My son's been asking about you." Jaden smiled slightly. "He doesn't need to. He's fine now." "He wants to see you." Jaden hesitated. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." Arthur studied him. Because you think you don't belong in that part of the city? Jaden didn't answer. The question hit too close, Arthur said softly. Maybe you should let him decide. Saturday came with another storm warning. Jaden still went. The Reed house wasn't hard to find. It was the one with gates that looked like they could keep out weather itself. He pressed the intercom, unsure what to say. But before he could, the gate opened. Caleb was waiting on the porch. He looked better, stronger, still walking carefully, but with more confidence. You really came, Caleb said. Your dad insisted. Yeah, he does that. Jaden smiled faintly. You look good. You look the same, Caleb said, then quickly added, I mean that as a compliment. They both laughed awkwardly. The sound felt good, normal. Inside the house was quiet. Arthur greeted them with a nod and stepped aside. I'll let you two talk. Caleb led Jaden to a corner of the room filled with small parts, gears, tools, and sketches taped to the wall. I'm building something. Jaden looked closer. A scooter, a new kind, Caleb said. One that doesn't get stuck in rain. I figured if I can design that, maybe next time someone like me doesn't have to wait for someone like you. Jaden blinked. You really think about that night a lot. Every day, Caleb said. Not because of what happened to me, because of what you did. Jaden looked at the sketches again, lines drawn in pencil, some smudged, some redrawn. It's good work. Dad's helping with the patent, Caleb said, then added quietly. But I told him if it ever makes money, I want it to go to the foundation. For kids who can't afford this stuff. Jaden didn't say anything for a while. The rain started outside, soft at first, then steadier. He looked out the window and said, You really are your father's son. Caleb grinned. You mean stubborn? I mean learning. By the time Jaden left, the rain had turned into a downpour. Arthur offered him a ride, but Jaden refused. I still remember how to walk through storms. Arthur smiled at that. Then maybe that's what makes you stronger. They shook hands at the door. It wasn't formal, but it wasn't casual either. It was something that sat between respect and gratitude. Arthur said quietly, You're not invisible anymore. Jaden's reply was simple. I never was. People just stopped looking. Arthur nodded. Then I'll make sure they start. The following months moved quickly. The foundation grew. Caleb's project gained attention. News outlets wrote about the storm invention, but Jaden stayed in the background. That was fine. He preferred to work unseen, the deliveries, the calls, the small acts no one thanked him for, but still mattered. One evening, a volunteer told him, You know you could be in charge of this place someday. Jaden smiled. I'm already where I need to be. He meant it. Late one night, Jaden locked up the office. The rain started again, soft, unthreatening. He stood for a moment under the awning, watching drops gather on the edge before falling. Across town, Arthur sat at his desk signing a document with Jaden's name printed under Project Director. He smiled to himself. Then he looked out the window toward the city that had once drowned them both and whispered, Maybe this is what we build when we stop running. Jaden stepped into the rain without hesitation. He didn't pull up his hood. He just walked steady, quiet, letting the water soak through. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and then faded. He didn't rush. He knew where he was going. And for the first time in a long time, the rain didn't feel like punishment. It felt like proof that he was still here. The city had changed by the time the next rainy season came. Billboards now showed Caleb's invention, the new mobility design that had started on a kitchen table with a few sketches and a promise. The foundation had grown too, filling a warehouse with boxes marked for hospitals and shelters. Every delivery carried the same logo, now Reed Foundation hearts that don't walk past. Jaden never got used to seeing his name printed on the side of the trucks under the words Project Director. He still wore the same gray jacket, stitched, faded, repaired too many times. It wasn't for comfort. It was for memory. That morning, he was standing in the rain again, not as a delivery boy, but handing out supplies to people waiting under the old bridge. The smell of wet earth and rust filled the air. He saw a young courier, soaked nervous, clutching a paper bag like it was worth a fortune. The boy's shoes were torn, his breath visible in the cold. Hey, Jaden said gently. Come in here before you freeze. The boy hesitated. I still have to get this signed. Jaden smiled. I've heard that before. He took off his jacket, draped it over the boy's shoulders. You'll warm up faster if you stop waiting for permission. The boy blinked. Aren't you in charge here? Jaden nodded once. Exactly. He watched the boy's surprise turn into a shy smile, the kind that says maybe the world isn't always cruel. Then Jaden turned back to the crowd. The line had gotten longer, single mothers, old men, kids in thin shirts. The kind of people no one wrote stories about unless someone rich got involved. Behind him, a car pulled up quietly. Arthur stepped out, umbrella in hand. The years had added lines to his face, but not distance between them. "You still refuse to wear a coat," Arthur said. Jaden glanced over his shoulder. "You still refuse to stop checking on me." Arthur shrugged. "We are who we are." They stood side by side, watching volunteers pass boxes hand to hand. Caleb rolled up in his chair, grinning, his clothes splattered with mud. "Guess who just got accepted into the engineering program?" Arthur's face lit up. "You did it." Caleb pointed at Jaden. "We did it." Jaden laughed quietly. "Don't drag me into your genius." "You're already in," Caleb said. "We're naming the prototype after you." Jaden frowned. "Don't you dare." Caleb grinned wider. "Too late." Arthur chuckled. "You might as well accept it. He's worse than I am." The three of them stood there, rain falling softly around them, the city moving like a river of headlights beyond the bridge. No words were needed. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was full of everything they'd carried, lost, and found again. Later that evening, the warehouse lights stayed on longer than usual. Volunteers had gone home, and Jaden was locking up. He passed the bulletin board near the entrance, a photo pinned there from a year ago, him. Arthur, Caleb, and his grandmother smiling under a banner that read, "From the mud we build." He paused there, his fingers brushing over her face. She was gone now. The illness had taken her quietly 2 months earlier, but her words still lived in him. "Hearts are for helping." He said it out loud softly. It didn't echo. It didn't need to. Outside, the rain came down harder. He stepped into it without an umbrella. Across the street, a jogger hesitated at the sight of an elderly man struggling with a cart full of groceries. Jaden stopped watching. The jogger looked around, uncertain, then turned back and helped. Jaden smiled. That's all it took, one person not walking past. And just like that, the world shifted again, even if no one else saw it. If you've listened this far, maybe you know what this story was really about. It wasn't about a rescue. It wasn't about a billionaire or a foundation. It was about the quiet decision to see someone and to keep seeing them even when the rain ends. If you've ever helped someone who couldn't repay you, if you've ever been that person who needed help but couldn't ask, your story is part of this one. Share it. Someone out there might need to know they're not alone. And if you want to hear more stories like this about the people who refuse to walk past, stay here with us. You'll fit right in. That night, Jaden walked back to the park. The same park where it all began, the mud still there after every storm, the bench still under the same tree. He sat down, listening to the rain on the leaves. A child nearby struggled with an umbrella that wouldn't open. Jaden stood, walked over, fixed it, smiled, and returned to the bench. No one would remember the moment. That was fine. Because he would. Because that's what people like him do. They wade in, they get muddy, they stay. And somewhere in the quiet between thunder and peace, the rain carried the same truth it had whispered years ago. No act of kindness ever disappears. It just changes who we become.